Hello, my name's Nicola Baker, and I'd like to invite you along a journey called life. It's an incredible journey, the highs and the lows, the colours of light and dark. Everyone's journey is different. Some are blessed to be in a blue lagoon, in a crystal clear water, with calm blue skies and a gentle breeze. They're sailing on luxury yachts, drinking champagne and kissed by the warm embrace of the sun. For others, the journey is fraught with danger and difficulty, with crashing waves, dark, ominous clouds, and wind that cuts you to the bone. They hold on to a rickety old ship as it rises in the stormy seas. They are cold and they can't see the horizon, and they are lost. When I was younger, single and not responsible for anyone else, I had a vastly different mask to the one that I wear today. I was a corporate achiever. My attitude was primarily self-centered, and I didn't understand the ripple effect that my world had on others, nor did I really care. I worked on the top floor of a building. I was recognised not only by my employers, but by the wider community. My luxury yacht had a private chef. I was in a different exotic port every night. And I was enjoying every day. Life was perfect. I met my husband Peter on the 1st of May 1999 in a dark and dingy nightclub. He rather quickly revealed to me that it wasn't easy having dependents, and I was immediately put off. I didn't want to meet anyone else's children. I was having a fine time being a single woman doing what single women did, and the last thing I wanted was second-hand children. But then he said, I have 6 budgies. It was love at second sight, and it progressed very quickly from there. He introduced me to his budgies. We became a family, and eventually he proposed. I was on top of the world, sailing along on my luxury yacht, and now with Peter sitting on the top deck with me. Within a year we were married, and our lives changed forever when we welcomed our firstborn into the world. Jed was a struggle through his first 6 weeks, but as new parents, Peter and I just kept going, looking forward to a normal sleep pattern returning someday. The calm waters of our journey started to become a little murky, and the ship became gnarled and weathered from the choppy seas. We desperately held on, but it was getting rough. That first 6 weeks with Jed seemed to drag. Months passed with no improvement, and it just went on and on and on. The nighttime became the devil. The sharks were circling our ship, and the onset of darkness brought dread and fear. Sleep deprivation became a form of torture. It played havoc on our judgment and our relationships, and it caused unintentional harm. Many friends and family offered advice, very forward in making our failures known. All the while, Jed was battling in his own way. An undiagnosed disease was causing him pain, making it simply impossible for him to achieve the rest that he and we so desperately needed. Then, at just 11 months old, Jed had a stroke. We quickly learnt that stroke is not an old person's disease. It can happen in kids too. Jed's stroke was catastrophic, causing him significant brain damage and leaving him paralysed down one side of his body. This cruel episode meant that Jed would not meet his milestones as other children the same age would. At the time, Peter and I didn't realise just how much Jed's stroke and consequent health issues would change our lives. We didn't know what caused the stroke, We still weren't sleeping, and the three of us found life had become very rough ocean in a storm. There was no lifeboat, there was no safe harbour, and we went on like this for years. I became terrified of everything. Jed was finally diagnosed with Moyamoya disease just after his 3rd birthday. To say the word Moyamoya means that people will turn around to us and say, I have never heard of this. Even worse, most medical practitioners don't know of this disease and inevitably look to their journals to find out what it is. Moyamoya disease was first named in Japan in the 1960s, and the word means puff of smoke. When the brain is damaged by Moyamoya disease, it has stenosis, that is a narrowing of the arteries. The brain is an incredible piece of equipment. It recognises that it has a deficit, and so it sends out tiny little capillaries around where the brain needs the blood to keep flowing. On an MRI, this looks like a puff of smoke. Treatment of Moyamoya disease is essential because this disease is progressive and it does kill. There are 2 main options for this treatment. The first is where a skilled and very well practiced neurosurgeon takes an artery from either the temporal or the occipital range of the head and feeds it directly down into the brain where the stenosis is. Whilst this is an invasive procedure, it also means that the blood is flowing to where it needs to be a whole lot faster. In children, though, they use an indirect pathway because everything in a little person's brain is so much smaller and so much more complex. In these cases, they'll take the artery and they'll lay it across the top of the brain. The brain will go, oh, that's yummy, and it'll take it down to where it needs it the most. But because it is indirect, it means it can take about 3 months for that to happen. And that bypass means that for that 3 months, that patient is at further risk of stroke. Jed's a complicated little fellow. I remember the day when he was diagnosed. We were told about Moyamoya disease in a room that was crowded full of doctors, and there was no sense of privacy for the message we were about to receive. Jed was playing at my feet, and I recall finding the courage to ask them, is this going to kill him? The answer was no. We sat on this diagnosis for a year, just managing to get through every day. Jed wasn't provided with help to ease his symptoms during that time, and I was so angry at our new fate. By now, enormous waves were crashing over our ship, and we were sinking. Because Jed is such a complicated little boy and he needed help to live with Moyamoya disease, he also had it not only in his brain, but also in his renal arteries. In July 2007, Jed had a renal artery bypass. At 4 years old, he'd already been through so much trauma. During Jed's recovery, we were advised that his second kidney was also in peril, and we lived with that sort of Damocles hanging over us. We waited for someone to tell us what to do. Finally, in January 2008, we were sent to Professor Marcus Studley at Macquarie University, who was very experienced with Moyamoya disease, and he agreed to take Jed as a patient through Sydney Children's Hospital. We made our first presentation with Sydney Kids in January 2008. When we were sent to Jed to Sydney Children's Hospital, we discovered that Moyamoya is progressive. It can be fatal if it's not treated, and often leaves the sufferer feeling incredibly alone and isolated due to its rarity. Jed had his first indirect bypass at the end of February 2008. I recall the choices that I made that day. I had a very clear intention that if Jed was to leave us, then the last moments of his life would not be lived with fear. So on my back he climbed, and off to the theatre we trotted, giggling, laughing, making all sorts of fun sounds. The theatre we were in was in a circuit of other theatres, and we were happy to wave at the astonished faces of the medical practitioners who were all kitted up in their gloves and masks, readily awaiting their own patients, and they peered out of the doors as this magical musical sound of Jed in full flight. When we arrived in Jed's theatre, it was very similar to being in a spaceship, the sort of vessel that Buzz Lightyear would use to go to space. And so with that, off he went, peacefully and eagerly, to see his friends in space. I was able to hold my emotions in check as I kissed his little face, told him I loved him, and I left the room. That walk away from him and into the arms of Peter, who was waiting outside, was the longest walk of my life. When you have a child in a critical situation like Jed was, fighting for his life, time does stand still. Peter and I walked up and down the halls of the hospital, pacing outside the ICU until we saw Marcus coming for us, still wearing his surgical gear. All had gone very well, and Jed would be with us in an hour or so. That hour was filled with anticipation. Our little boy had made it through the surgery, so now we needed to wait for the artery to go to the area of his brain where he needed it the most. Finally, slightly more than an hour later, Jed was wheeled into the ICU with Peter and I there to meet him. He had tubes coming out of him everywhere. He had plasters over what turned out to be numerous burr holes and large incisions across the top of his head and down the sides. Over the coming hours, the skilled team of intensivists took steps to bring Jed out of his deep sleep. He wasn't happy. He did come around, but he did discover that something brutal had happened to his little body. He didn't like the cords and the tubes that were coming out of him, and he spent upwards of 12 hours fighting with the foreign objects that were invading his body. We would try and sedate Jed back to a peaceful rest because his blood pressure was exceeding 200 systolic, enough for us to fear him having another stroke. Any kind of sedation just didn't work. He had his mum holding him down while the medical professionals attempted to replace the sharp cannulas that Jed had been systematically removing. It was impossible to keep him calm. Finally, at around 3 a.m, our little boy drifted off to sleep. Peter was able to go to the parents' room, and I was able to lie down on the fold-out bed provided to me. Anyone who's been in an ICU will know that there's no opportunity for privacy. There's a nurse at the foot of the bed. There are many other professionals in the room attending to the acute needs of their other patients. I didn't get much rest. However, just as I started to see the rays of the rising sun, I drifted into a place of peace. And that's where I felt the warm hand of my grandfather, who'd come to sit with me. I'd never experienced anything like this before, and in my heart I asked him, "What are you here for?" He said he had a job to do. His response felt like it wasn't to take my boy away from me, but to sit with me in the most traumatic time of my life. I felt my granddad drift off again as the hustle and the bustle of the hospital grew, and I felt so grateful that he'd come to me at that time. After such an intense night, we returned to the ward the next day and then discharged back to Ronald McDonald House a few days later. The plan for Jed was that because his Moyamoya had progressed to an extent that couldn't be ignored, we were to remain in Sydney, and when they felt that he was strong enough, he would have his second surgery on the other side of his brain. There was a period of 6 weeks sitting around, caring for him, caring for each other, trying to keep our spirits high. Easter rolled around and we'd been able to go out on some short trips, so we took Jed to the Royal Easter Show. We did feel a bit like we were highly visible with Jed's scars. It was impossible not to notice that he'd been through a very traumatic time. There were lots of stares, but also lots of kind-hearted acknowledgements from other parents. All was going really well until around 11 a.m. Jed started to become really upset. He started to arch his body and we just couldn't settle him. So we figured we'd best head back to the hospital. Never in a million years did we imagine that Jed was having another stroke right in front of us. When we got back to the hospital, we went straight up into the ward and they allowed us to stay in the nurse's room because there were no beds for us. An urgent MRI was ordered for the following morning, and the damage that this stroke had done caused Jed to become blind in his left peripheral vision. Peter and I were devastated. Because Jed was so at risk of another stroke, it was decided that he would undergo his second surgery very shortly after. And just before Anzac Day, off he went, riding like a little trooper on Mummy's back into surgery. The intensivists knew better this time, and although they had already named Jed the crocodile, they decided that it would be better if he remained sedated the whole time, which was much more peaceful for all of us. Days after our second surgery, we were allowed to come home. I recall being met by my dad, my stepmother, and my nana at the airport. The look of shock on their faces was something that I will never forget, as they watched our poor little fellow, all unsteady, with impaired speech, huge scars all over his head, wobble towards them for a cuddle. Those reactions were probably the most difficult because we hadn't pre-warned anyone about what they would see in Jed. And it really brought home to Peter and I just the enormity of what we had been through. We got in the car and drove home, and Jed, being Jed, decided that the best place for him to be was jumping on the trampoline. So a team of us had to stand at the ready to catch him in case he fell. Life continued. Peter and I thought early on that Jed would be our only child, but then we had two more. We had Charlie and Lucy, both healthy babies, and both very, very welcome. Unfortunately, when Jed was 12, Moyamoya Disease decided that it had some more for Jed. And again, he was taken back to Sydney to undergo further brain surgery, where Marcus gave him further indirect bypasses to both quarters at the back of his brain. When we were able to return home, it was understood that Jed would have no further interventions, and effectively was, and still remains, palliative. We returned to a relatively quiet life in the country. I had made a new friend, Nicole, who had moved to Ravenshoe with her husband. She was someone I was very easily distracted by. Doing school mum stuff, she was an entrepreneurial soul and was always trying new ideas. Her ability to see and have the courage to take it on, a new opportunity, was like something I'd never seen before. And when she launched her handmade fudge business, I knew she was going to do extremely well. I was also looking for other opportunities for Jed. His health had settled down. We had been able to live in somewhat normal life, and we heard that the new Pirates of the Caribbean movie was going to be filmed in Queensland. We decided that Captain Jack Sparrow was in our reach, and we launched a campaign, Help Jed Meet Captain Jack Sparrow. At its peak, this campaign had over 5,000 members. And in late May 2015, the entire Baker family went to the Gold Coast, where we were privately chaperoned to the set. We hung out with the cast and the crew, and Jed was dressed in full costume by Academy Award-winning Penny Rose. I even bumped into an old school friend who made his life working with logistics in the Australian film industry. When we arrived on set, Jed seemed to know exactly where he was going. He was a fully fledged pirate, dressed in his costume, and pirates do not travel by golf buggy. So he refused the ride that was being offered to him, and off he marched, followed by his very own entourage of around 15 members of the crew. We were taken into a huge shed where the floor was covered in ground rubber, and we found ourselves in the deep blue sea behind a coral bommy, where we watched on very small screens Captain Jack and Henry, a young actor also from far north Queensland, having a sword fight. There was also a body double sitting behind us, and he sat wiggling his fingers at Jed, which was very entertaining for us all. Like magic, we heard in the distance a voice that was so familiar to us all. Captain Jed is here, and around the corner came the one and only Captain Jack Sparrow. Captain Jack was one of the most engaging people I've ever met. I don't know if it was because I was starstruck by being in the immediate company of one of my childhood heroes, crushes, or whether I was enamored with the idea of being with the character himself. However, I genuinely believe that Johnny Depp had set out in his alter ego to connect with Jed in a way that only two pirates could connect. Captain Jack would engage with Jed in a very personal fashion, and Johnny Depp would turn to me for any kind of clarity or understanding about our son. He was able to flip in and out of character as needed, and it was pure magic to see. More than that, Johnny recognised and spent some quality time with all of the Bakers, and I was forced to give him a hug of gratitude when we said goodbye, from one mother to her child's favourite character. And hey, I hugged Johnny Depp. I'm told that the gift of my boiled fruit cake was eaten in one sitting and that it was ambrosia. When we returned, life went back to some kind of normality. On the 9th of June 2015, Johnny's birthday, I was working from my little cottage when I heard a very loud boom. More, I felt it through my body, and I wondered what it was. The cottage is around 500 metres as the crow flies from where the boom was coming from. My phone rang, and it was the editor of the local paper, who we'd come to know because our trip with Johnny did create national and international attention. He told me that a car had rolled into the back of the local bakery. Could I please take a photo of the car for the next edition of the paper? I thought that would be easy. I'll go and see my friend Nicole and grab some lunch. It was a wet day, so I jumped in the car and drove to the corner where I could see a plume of thick black smoke rising from where the cafe and the bakery were. I drove slowly into town, and it was madness there. One man was waving vehicles past, so I drove through and I saw that the cafe was on fire. I could see right through to the back of the cafe. I parked my car as quickly as I could and ran down the street, trying to call Nicole on the phone as I went. She didn't answer. So I ran into the melee and asked a number of people who were there, where is Nicole? The one person who knew led me to the ablutions block, and she told me, Nicole's in a bad way. And that's where I found my friend. Having had the experiences I had endured with Jed, I knew that I couldn't let my friend see fear. In what was a split second, I made the choice for Nicole that I would put on my well-worn mask and do what needed to be done. I went in and I saw her sitting in a plastic chair with one lady who was trying to douse her with one of those push-button taps. She looked at me and she had the most beautiful big blue eyes. She said, I'm really hurt, Nick. My hands were shaking, and again I made a conscious decision to calm my nerves. I got down on my knees and I asked her what she needed the most. She said she was going to pass out, so I ran to locate a paramedic and we moved her to the grass, where we stayed until she was moved into an ambulance and later taken by helicopter. Nicole had sustained injury to 95% of her body. I didn't realise in that moment that my husband was 20 metres away. He couldn't see me, but he knew that I wasn't answering my phone, and in all likelihood I was in the cafe with Nicole, because I was most lunchtimes. I was sitting with her, holding her hands and trying to give her all of the love that I had. I was very focused on her. My body felt that intensity for days after. Friends and family were all texting and calling, and I couldn't answer those messages because I needed to be present for Nicole and was not willing to move my attention from her. The ripples of trauma from this event travelled far and wide. The anguish that my friends and family suffered not being able to contact me for that time remains unquantifiable. The following days were spent in vigil for Nicole, and in the early hours of the morning, some days after the explosion, and when her parents and her daughter were able to return, Nicole passed away. Our town lost good people that day, including my friend, the lady who'd been such a positive influence in life, and now she remains even more so in death. A lot happened, and I saw pain like never before. I allowed myself to wallow in the cesspit of grief and trauma for as long as I needed to. But then the moment came. It was time for me to pivot. I realised that Nicole didn't get to live out her dreams. Her life had been taken from her in an instant, on a normal day. She'd done nothing out of the ordinary, and those she left behind had a choice to make. In 2019, I realised I'd been grieving for long enough, and the loss of what I thought my child was going to be, and for the loss of my friend. And whilst grief is a very different beast for every person, I recognised that it was now my turn to get up, dust myself off, and get back on track. I made the choice that my attitude was everything. I could take power over my own life, and I could decide to leave my best mark. My kids were watching, and I wanted them to see the power in the choice. I decided that I'd been through an experience with rare disease like Moyamoya. I was perfectly placed to help others through the early diagnosis and treatment. I could offer a kind word here and there. I could let others understand what certain phrases meant. I could explain tests and what their expectations could be. I founded Moyamoya Australia in September 2019. To date, Moyamoya Australia has gifted over $100,000 to research and training into this disease. I'd like to know in my lifetime why we have Moyamoya, and that's what drives me. The impact of the impact we can have on Moyamoya patients' stroke and childhood disease is immeasurable. We've received national and international recognition by way of awards, which helps us to raise the profile of the disease. We've been published. We have a memoir called The Thing About Jed, and we also have a children's book, My Mate Jed, which explains stroke to children. I was honoured to be included in the Women Making a Difference anthology from the Women Changing the World Press. Thank you, Peace and Katie. And I've just written a chapter on a new compilation, which is for families of stroke patients. We're active members of the Stroke Foundation's Lived Experience Advisory Group for Childhood Stroke. And as a team, that group is leading the world in the provision of resources to families and children who have suffered from stroke. Most importantly, we have been actively supporting patients and their families who have Moyamoya disease, both emotionally and financially, so that they know that they are not alone. The universe continues to teach me. On the 13th of June 2001, my only nephew, who I called the Comet because of his bright, fast, hot light, lost his battle with rhabdomyosarcoma. With Joseph, Joey, in my mind, I continue to strive to live my best life. I'm resolved to making this world a better place, now with him also sitting on my shoulder. In January 2025, Kelsey, my niece and Joseph's sister, lost her partner. He was taken by a great white shark off the coast of South Australia. And last week, we had a call from Jed's neurologist who told us that although 3 of his bypasses were rock solid, one of them is not. And we don't know what that's going to mean for us in the near or long-term future. And so we wait. Today I'm the master of my own ship. It's not a luxury yacht, it's more a speedboat. Peter's at the wheel. I'm sitting next to him enjoying the scenery, and the kids are in a biscuit, laughing as they ride in the wake of our boat. We can change direction at a moment's notice, throwing out lifelines to those who need us. I still wear my mask some days, particularly last week. Life has delivered more blows and losses, but now I can use my mask as a way of coping, not from hiding, on the more difficult days. I've come to terms with the idea that life is not guaranteed. Tomorrow may never come. And I will strive to leave the best mark on this world as I possibly can. My children are watching and learning from me, so I choose to use my speedboat as a way to find joy, happiness, and kindness. Knowing that we could be the life raft for another family is where I have found my purpose. But I need your help. I can't do this alone. And my call to action is to continue to seek opportunities for corporate sponsorship, storytelling, and raising the profile of Moyamoya disease. What I know to be true is this: a positive attitude doesn't always come naturally, but we can choose to abandon fear. We can say yes to every opportunity given to us, and we can choose to inspire others to take the same path. We don't know what tomorrow will bring, and so I'd like to show you how I say yes, because there is no day but today.
Keep them safe.
Oh, okay, I got this.
my children, I loved you. I was the first to zip line, means I'm the first to die.
When you're ready, feet up. Feet up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Both.
Yeah. As someone who has a deathly fear of heights, I'm not scared of heights. I'm not scared of heights. Fear of me, I'm not scared of heights. I'm not scared of heights. Deathly fear of heights. Okay.
Let the rope pass.
Hey, children! Your mama! Your mama! Your mama! Your mama! Stepping up to that platform was the most terrifying experience in my entire life. My philosophy is never say no. Okay. For me, that was the most extreme thing I've ever done in my life. So everything from here on in is going to be easy, isn't it?
I'm scared that she just said that. Because we don't know what's happening next.
Thank you so much for letting me tell my story. It's been wonderful talking to you.